Okay. I just needed to put it to the default IP. Okay. Can you see the streamer?
Yeah, I'm getting it says stream is live.
Yeah, and
Um,
the audio, my mic audio
I
seems to be good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Soup says streams up. Oh,
Yeah.
because you're not gonna be able to see you're not gonna be able to see chat, right?
Yeah. No,
Okay, so I'll field.
I can see that, but like it's just like me having the thing muted. So like,
Oh, it's no problem. I was just wondering if you needed me to keep an eye on for you, but if you can see it as well, that
no, just
is.
keep it because I'm gonna talk about some certain things. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I can do I can do eyes on chat. If you handle the talking,
There's maybe
that
gonna be
probably
one
works.
moment or not when I'm not gonna talk because it's my dad's giving me some coffee, but like besides that, it'll be fine. Okay, but
Okay.
anyway, welcome to hopefully this time actually for real the tour the Roma One talk with me, Alicerulerofwater and Weasel.
Yes, we are here, and it is wonderful, and everything is gonna go smooth as silk.
Yes,
Okay, good.
as
Thought we
Hollow
lost you for a
Knight
second.
as Hollow Knight Silk Song, the thing that's definitely real. But anyway, okay, as a the first one table was about the history of Mali people, the second one was about media representation, and this one's gonna be Roma people in the current day. It's not great, folks. It's not great out there. Um,
I, I know that you were telling us something a little bit. I want to say last week, one of the politicians
yeah.
was acting the
So
clown.
I guess I'll do a bit of backstory, but because this is very funny. So in Portugal, Portugal is a country that has like deep anti-Romani roots, right? Even though like Romani people like considered like historical like minority in Portugal, there's always the idea that Portugal. This also goes into like black Portuguese people, not a minority group. So there was always the idea that like Portugal's like a country that like was always like compared to Spain, compared to France, it was like always just this homogeneous thing made up of like white Portuguese people, right? There was a report from like about one of the newly formed anti-racism observatory, with fun fact is a public entity that has not operated for the last 3 years because they haven't put the positions that needs to be put for it to operate. Great stuff.
In 2 years,
In 3 years, three.
3 years.
Yes, 3 years. Also, it originally was not even going to include Romani people. It was only going to focus on like this big idea of anti-racism without mentioning immigrant or black people. Just they had to like when about Romani groups complained, they had to include. It's I believe it's now anti-xenophobia, racism, and xenophobia, which is like I wasn't say anti-Romani stuff. Uh, so yeah, great stuff. But no, there was like a report by that group when they started of like, well, Portugal is a relatively like new country when it comes to have racial diversity or any type of diversity, and then just like excludes like what many people exist and so right. But yeah, this would exist in the 2000s, like in the 80s and 90s. We technically did not have like fascist parties, but we had like mainstream right wing parties that were like not the most popular ones, but always like drifted in terms of like a discourse of what's like fascist politics, right?
Hmm.
Specifically, we had like several parties like writing like anti-Romani stuff, right? Because there's like a bunch of anti-Romani discourse is very popular here, unfortunately. So in like 2010, this guy named Andeventula, who is a lawyer who hasn't done a legal case in like 8 years, and who's mostly known for being a soccer commentator. Like when I say sports talk, he's like a sock sock. He's like a sock sock sports commentator, like one of those Boston sports commentator guys, radio guys, that
Okay.
became very famous because he would like say incredibly inflammatory, like racist shit, anti-Romani shit about about like soccer players. Specifically getting into fights with one of the country's like few Romani celebrities. That's a very famous soccer player called Kolersma. Uh, So yeah, this
And
guy became like a non-celebrity. So the main right-wing party here went, this guy seems useful for us. So they got him to be their like male candidate for a city called Lawless, which is a very industrial city, very working class that has a big Romani community near the Lisbon area. And this guy just won a campaign that was like intensely anti-Romani, intensely like racist in general, sexist, transphobic, etc., etc. He did not win, but he got like a fan base out of it. So he left the main right-wing party and formed his like the main fascist party here currently, which is a party named Enough. That's just their name, Enough. Um,
okay,
and like
so the main right wing party wasn't right wing enough for this jackass, so he
yes, no,
wanted
he
to make his
left
own.
saying he specifically left by putting a note of like how they were like controlled by the banking interests and the elites, which means of course the Zeus, because you have to
Of
put
course.
a bit of like a bit anti-Semitism there, but so yeah, so this election, there's an election upcoming. Like they currently have 50 seats in parliament. This fascist party, um, and they might gain seats. If they lose, sadly, they're only gonna lose a couple. Like so, they're gonna have still be like the 40 members of parliament. But their leader guy was doing campaign stuff 2 days ago. Had a heart attack. Uh, Yesterday was doing survived the heart attack. Was doing campaign stuff. Had a second heart attack, and currently he's in a state of not showing up in the campaign. Today's last campaign day, and he's just giving video calls from his hospital bed. So yeah, hopefully he
Dude,
dies. Honesty.
that would be great, honestly. The one thing now, the the politician I was, this is maybe the same politician, but you had mentioned, I want to say like a couple weeks back, so not this, the heart attack story is more recent, that there had been a politician that was making some fairly inflammatory anti-Romani speeches, but that there had been some
Oh yeah,
pushback
that it's the same
against him.
guy. For
It's the
context,
same guy.
this guy like he's very hated. Like there's a thing here. I was actually reading an article about this from a Spanish newspaper, like Spanish like leftist progressive newspaper. Uh, a lot of, like there's a dynamic here where like a lot of the big voter base for like his party, right? All in alias were like his part were like there's a lot of Paul people, but there's also a lot of Romani people, right? Because there's a dynamic of like basically him going to alias that are like his party going to alias that are like Paul and like working class, and then going the reason why you're Paul, the reason why you're working class is not because of like capitalism. It's not because Portugal is a very centralized country and there's some reasons that like are not near the capital or very farm agrarian that don't have ways of having investment. Because Portugal doesn't have like regional government or state governments like the US, besides for the couple island governments. No, it's the reason why you're actually poor is because of those Romani people. They're stealing because they're getting too much social benefits, right? So like
Which is generally why people steal, is because they're getting too many social benefits.
yeah, well, like the framing is basically getting any so when like the framing with them is like Romani people and like even like disabled people, black people, anyone that's like not a white guy, a cis white guy getting disability benefits or getting like any benefits, right? Is actually evil because they're clearly stealing, right? Because but yeah, like this has created a dynamic of like Romani people in Portugal, even like I'm fairly white passing. I still get weird commentaries by weird fascist guys occasionally, just because my skin is slightly darker than most Portuguese people. Like this has like the outright fascist way talk has made a lot of Portuguese people's lives genuine hell. A lot of
Mm.
Romani Portuguese people's lives anyway here. Like there's been attacks, there's been racism, there's been like center left and center right like city governments are trying to gain the popularity like what's happening in America right now with the Democrats, like just going, what if instead of fighting the fascism we just embrace the fascism, right? So like doing in municipal programs to like steal Romani children from families because they're so-called not protected enough. There's like removing of like Romani people from social housing, right? So because of that, a lot of Romani groups. A couple years ago, it used to be like all of the main Romani groups, Romani people in Portugal, while all united, we are united. They are still a bit separated by reason because we all live a bit isolated. I mean, if Portugal is a short car, it's not that like large of a country, right? But like most of the Romani groups put out a letter a couple of years ago saying, "Do not vote for this fascist party." Now, what has been happening is every time this guy has been going on a campaign trail, right? Like Lexer kneeling, he's just been like getting actual like beating up by Romani groupers, but like Romani defense groupers. So like this has happened three
Yes.
times consecutively, 3 days straight
Yes.
before the heart attack. He's like just been genuinely stopped from campaigners in my home city as well. In my home city, there's like a popular like flea market thing, right? But a lot of the flea markets in Portugal, a lot of like the markets, like the local markets, are well, money people sell there because it's one of the few places where can get money, right? So selling stuff in like the flea markets. So like the
Mm.
moment he arrived in the flea market here, he was literally just almost getting beaten up by like 20 different money people, which is pretty good. um,
Well, it's good. It's heartening to see that there's some organized pushback to this.
yeah, so I guess this goes into like the history, like since like the 90s and 2000s, there's been like a couple ways of like doing like there's been attempted like all over Europe and like all over the world. But, like Europe is my focus because I'm European, sadly. But like there's been focus on like making more money groups, like making more money with white groups that are trying to actually like do social work for Romani communities and everything. Those groups have been suffering because like very few European states actually recognize Romani people as a minority group, even if like they're like a historical minority group in most of Europe. But the European Union also has been incredibly like stalling in the issue, primarily because of like the interests of like right wing, not just even right wing or fascists, like even like liberal governments in places like the northern countries, like Italy, like Hungary. There's an interest in like not actually giving more money people like woman people like any kind of like support, right? Because it's like I mentioned this before, but like being against Roma people is like being against like black people in America, right? It's a topic that's very normalized, very easy to like grift on, right? That like it gives money to politicians, right? Due to all the hate Roma people get. So like there's a very normalized anti-Romani, anti-Roma thing in Europe because it's just both due to institutionalized hate, of course, and also because it's very easy to get votes and like money off grifting at those type of things. Right. So like since the 2000s, like since the 90s, there's always been groups trying to do that, and there's been like groups much more focused on like respectability politics and like trying to fucking assimilate Romani people into like traditional civilized European living. But there's also been groups focusing much more on like, actual community building and actual like trying to actually fight the ongoing hate. And like it's been a troubled area, but like you can notice at first it seems like the assimilation side was gonna win, but like with as more woman hate is becoming normalized again, just out of like the fucking wireless. Due to the rise of fascism in Europe, you start to see much more like active, actually community organizing groups. Because the reality is like, this is like with any marginalized group, but fundamentally the reality is like with Roma people, like, while I believe, of course, the Portuguese states to like incorporate Roma people and everything, there's never be to assimilate the terms because assimilation is never the victory, it's never the right position, right? And also, at the end of the day, fundamentally, just the Roma people cannot be assimilated because we disprove the like hundreds of victor ideas of like the idea of like to be a civilized European you must be like this, you must act like this, right? But yeah, so like there's been a wise much more like actual community organizing regarding Roma groups. This is really nice to see. The situation in like generally in Europe has been like very bad. Like like politically, there's been some victories for the left in some places in Spain and France, but like fundamentally, even like you started to notice a bit of the rise of Trump, a bit which is like the rise of fascism in Europe, which is like a bit also different because fascism in Europe has been much more before Trump, right? And like why a lot of European fascists like Trump and Musk, they're fundamentally just doing that because they're like just useful allies and they're easy to discard when like they're not useful allies. But
Mm.
yeah, due to that, there's been just a bounce of like anti like Roma hate showing up. There always was, but like you anyway start to get to the point where like there's anyway just politicians and like fucking like I sent you the article from like a couple of years ago in like 2018 or 19 the Italian government was trying and is still currently trying with the different fascist government to like have like a census, but it's not actually a real census. It's to detect how many people are in Italy so they can deport them all to like India, which is bad.
And it was something that digging back into the reading that I had done, but it felt like it was echoing some of the things that was in the book that you had recommended for me, that was talking about like the rise of the Nazis prior to World War II, and like the quote unquote census that they were doing at that time, which was just to be used for extermination policies later. And reading that article on what was going on in Italy, it was like, they does nobody else see this? Like, this has been done before.
Yes, it's like one of those things. Like it's the same. The fascist party here also proposes that it's a very common like European tactic of like fundamentally. It's a very common European tactic towards Romani people, like just like putting a census to deport them. Both one from the Nazis and also one from the. This also goes back and back, right? Because all these parties are anti-immigrants, right? So fundamentally, it's
Mhm.
very easy to just go, oh, those people that actually been living here since forever. Not that listen. As much as I use this argument, I don't actually care for many people only live 50 years in Portugal, right? We are here. We are like a minority group. We deserve to be here, right? It doesn't matter the years. But at the same time, it's like very easy to go. This group that has been living here since literally the existence of the Portuguese state and Portuguese nation. Actually, they're all just like not actually Portuguese, so we need to just deport them and remove their citizenship.
Mm.
Which also is a similar thing done to people from the Portuguese colony, from the ex-Portuguese colonies in Africa that were born in Portugal, have Portuguese citizenship, never been to Angola, to Mozambique, etc., etc. But like the argument is like, oh, because it's basically they're non-white in some way, so they must be like not actually Portuguese.
Mm. Mm.
Yes, yes. Alongside that, there's also the talk about like fucking crime. Like crime discourse specifically in Portugal is very much focused in two things. First, of course, anti-blackness. There's a lot of talk about like, oh no, those black teenagers, they're like starting crime, they're starting shoot-ups, right? And also goes into like, wow, those Romani people, they're stealing, they cause crime. Being near them is like, there's like a lot of like, there's like a lot of so-called like luxury like apartment places and like highways in like places where like West people live in Portugal where like Romani people like Zen Romani band. There's like signs that say like no Romani people. Because the idea is like just
Mm.
being near a Romani person. Just like, being near like a Roma person is like itself just brings crime. Because the idea is like oh you're like so just your existence like is like criminals like dirty was actually recognized in like the book we talked about like last time.
Mm. Mm.
Yes, there's like the big things of fundamentally a lot of like stuff about like, oh, they're not actually part of X nation. They're criminals. They steal. Like fucking. I was talking about this like during the first attempt at the last one table, right? But, like there's the other big things like social benefits, like I mentioned, like
Mm.
like our discourse about social benefits is basically similar to America, right? It's of course also targets black people, of course, but also like there's a lot of stuff like oh those Romani welfare queens they're having several children and not actually working, which is like not true actually. Get it?
Bullshit.
Yeah, it's it. It's like not true. It's like like the benefits are very small. Specific in Portugal, the benefits are very small, of course. Like getting on those benefits is like difficult. Like I have issues like getting those benefits as a disabled person, of course. But, like I have talked with one people that have tried getting those benefits. You get kicked out of them very easily if you just do anything that's even not a crime, but it's perceived as something that could be perceived as a crime. You'll off those benefits.
Mm.
Also, another new thing they're doing with this is fucking. This is specifically a general anti-poor people, but it's been targeting Roma people a lot. There's the focus of like Portugal has been having like a lot of housing issues. We have like the most expensive housing market in Europe, in the world, due to the fact we during like 2015, 2014, our like housing regulations were like were like we moved the liberalized to the hell, and we basically are having an issue like. In a country where the minimum wage is like 900 euros, those places in the capital city were like an apartment is like 200 euros, like 2,100,000 just for one room apartments that you have to sell it like somebody else. So how does this connect into this everything? So a lot of families are living in like there's a tradition in Portugal and Spain of what's called like sack buildings, so like little sacks, like tiny houses that have like no sanitation, often no roof, near like the capital city. I believe Japan has had a history of that as well, and even like America, like just like these bad decorated houses where like it's like no one should live there, like so they're making a return, and with the return of that, instead of actually doing any social support, the right wing here in government has been doing a thing of activating what's called children protection laws, which are as always not actually about protecting children, which means if your like mom or dad or family is incredibly poor and living like rundown housing that cannot provide for the child, the Portuguese state is now removing kids from the families. This is like and then putting in the like foster care, which is like a big issue that's like a nightmare. This specifically is now being used to attack like Romani children. It was used already in the dictatorship in a similar way to remove like fucking Romani children, but now it's back and it's like a fucking hell because instead of yeah.
Oh, go on.
No,
please.
no, go ahead. Please go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, like, because it feels very similar to how indigenous kids in the U.S. and in Canada were treated as well, and it was an act of cultural genocide of taking those kids from their indigenous parents and from their indigenous communities and being raised in white homes and away from like traditions, away from language, and like a forced assimilation.
Yeah.
So there wouldn't be a younger generation.
Yeah, the difference here is like this is primarily just like so this started as like an anti-poor people measure, right? Because there's a part of the party's law that basically says if a parent is like not providing for the child, the state can like remove the kid, and this traditionally has been not used that bad, to be honest. It has been used for cases of like domestic abuse or like very like problematic families, and like a sense of like there's a lot of infighting and violence and stuff like that. There's issues with how like those processes have been happening, right? Because like historically those processes are like Portuguese orphanages in the Portuguese healthcare system is like Hollanders, but like it has been used at least it was used for families where the child could like not actually be the family, right? Because there's like a lot of violence even towards the child. But now it's being used in this way of like, oh, if you're like a single mother living in a house that's very run down and everything, that's not your fault. It's the fact that the Portuguese state delegalized housing measures, housing protections. The fact that that our minimum wage is really small, that we don't have a lot of benefits supported. Right? It's not the actual fault of the mother. Instead of actually supporting that mother, supporting the child, we're going to say the mother, the father, or the family is endangering that child by not giving them good protections, right? So we're going to take them from them, which is like it's happening to white people. It's happening to a lot of different people. It's really repulsive, but like specifically because of this, to no surprise, it has been affecting Roma people and like people from the former African colonies of Portugal a lot, because those people don't already have access to good housing, to good protections, right? So it's a very easy way of like going, you're not protecting your child because you're living in bad housing. again at the father. So instead of actually helping you, I'm gonna take your side from you, which is like fucking nice.
I just want to point out really quick, getting seconds from Holly and Soup, who have both mentioned that this is a similar thing that's what happened in Australia and is called the stolen generation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just wanted to get their voices in really, really quickly. I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah, no, yeah. This is yeah, no. The comparisons are things because the comparisons are way too. Because why technically this affects everyone? It has been effective because the most marginalized people in Portugal, which is like fucking
mm-mm,
Roma people and people of the ex-African colonies. It's there was also like a more like during the 50s, and not mentioned this like in the previous teams, but like during like the 70s and 60s, the 50s, the Portuguese dictatorship was like explicitly doing this as well, but to specific target Roma people. Same
mm,
with Spain. The Franco dictatorship also did that in with the Roma people there in Spain. Which is a nightmare. But yeah, there's like a bunch of like systems, a bunch of like ways people attack Roma people, and like a lot of systems used to attack Roma people currently. They've always been there, right? But like they've been up on fire because like not to just say they're very easy. Oh, it's because they want the money, want the boats. But primarily it's just like it's said very easy to fucking just attack Roma people in Europe and gain popularity after that. Like it's incredibly easy because like it's we are so dehumanized, right? There's a
mm, mm, mm,
dehumanization that like makes people like I'm one of those cases of like a person that like did not actually grow up like inside the Roma community. I just found out I have heritage after like I had to like confront my family about it, right? And like there's a
mm,
like this is also one of those things because I want to briefly talk about another thing, right?
mm,
Which is specifically regarding actually like census stuff for real. Like census stuff for real. So like, like the census, like there's the Nazi census that like have actually like dehumanized like Roma people, right?
mm,
But there's also the issue of like counting like how many Roma people are in the country is very difficult because there's a lot of people like me, like my family of like heritage, that, like don't actually say they have heritage because saying you have heritage is like saying you have like the Black Plague. Right, you get like socially isolated if you all that openly about it. Besides like talking about it one time per year at the family dinner.
mm,
So like it's one of those things where like it's genuinely very hard to calculate. Like I believe like the Portuguese statistics say like women people like 3% of Portugal, like 6%. It's more probably. It's like 10 probably, honestly. Because like there's a
mm,
lot of people that just don't talk, and there's a lot of and like sound like people doing this research actually don't often go to a lot of other places that have warmer people that are relatively isolated, right? And alongside that, there's also another fucking thing I briefly talked about in like the first attempt at Windows thing that is annoying me because like it does annoy me because it's a less popular method, but it's very insidious what it happens. So like warmer
mm,
people in Portugal and Europe are mostly attacked, right? Because like there's no attempt at doing like respectability politics of like this woman people are good, but the bad ones are the artists because normally it's like oh woman people are bad, right? But there's some
mm,
attempts at like trying to do that are deeply insidious. There's attempts at simulation, so real bad, but basically to understand why they're bad, right? They did like if you just turn all woman people into lawyers and everything. They're gonna become expert on everything, which is not understanding how this combination works, and like just blaming the community for it, right? But there's also a thing
mm,
of like people, like there's some people that specifically bring Roma issues, not because they care, because they're anti-Romani, but to specifically bludgeon other marginalized communities. To give an
mm.
example, it's very common for some white wingers in Portugal that don't care about Roma people and are anti-Roma to be like, well, why do black people complain in Portugal about discrimination? We're not America. Roma people are the only group that face discrimination. And like that's just using to bludgeon black people in Portugal, right?
Mm-mm.
Specifically because like there is some anti-blackness among Roma people in Portugal. This has to do primarily with like after you face like a million, like fucking a million Holocaust, a million murders, and a million things, very isolated, you will start like feeling pessimistic about the world and attack other communities. Right? You will go, oh,
Mm.
why? There's like a common sentiment among certain like old woman people of like, oh, why are people talking about like those black people in America, like those black people, right? Because like we are the one, no one talks about us. Was just like two in the part of like no one talks about woman people, but like the same people that don't talk about woman people not talking about like black people in Portugal, right? This is like a thing that
Mm.
why bad? I wouldn't blame like a 70-year-old grandpa to have this. Like it's more like a systematic thing, right? It's more a thing of like society has abandoned these people, and like with no help, it has letting some bigotry that needs to be dealt by like a lot of like there's already pockets of like black communities in Portugal. To give an example, Portugal doesn't have a. Portugal is one of the few places in Europe that doesn't actually like have a law banning racist speech or racism in general. Discrimination.
Okay.
It's all like ATO like laws that are like really bureaucratic, right? So there's a campaign by a lot of black people and like ATO marginalized groups like actually put in a like anti-racist law in Portugal, right? That campaign has had like a lot of like help, like a lot of surprisingly very good like community building between like Roma communities and black communities. Right,
Mm.
one of the leaders of like one of the largest Roma groups here has repeatedly talked about how the struggle of like black people in Portugal and Roma people in Portugal are the same, and how we need to be united, specifically because a lot of this, we live a lot of like the ex colonies, ex Portuguese African colonies, black people in Portugal live in the same areas as Romani people often now. So like they talk with the South like right. But there's been attempts of like using the suffering a lot of Romani people have, and a lot of like some Romani elders have, white to just like start sitting to communities, so they don't actually organize
Mm.
together, right? But like weird right wingers. The only successful example of this was like Portugal doesn't. Most European countries don't have census ways, right? Like America. This is a big issue besides the UK, which is technically not European anymore, but like this is a big issue in terms of having data about like how many non-white people are there in Portugal and which programs you can use to help them, right? So a
Mm.
couple of years ago, there was an attempt by the government to have to include a race option in the census we do, right? That that was like defeated because like okay, so about some more many organizations were against it because of the fears of like it would lead into the stuff that was happening in Italy, right? That there would be
Mm.
like an option for like Romani people, and like they would like the Romani people like put in the census, and like they would get like deported, right? Which is
Mm.
understandable. Like it's an understandable feeling, but instead of like people talking, trying to have a debate about how to do it without, there was like talks about like not maybe letting Roman people be opt out to make the whole thing opt out, right? The president of Portugal, who's a right winger plus other right wingers, used that to go, see, the Roma people don't actually like this, so we need to. So American wokeness is attacking the most marginalized community. Um, so the whole thing of including a race option in the census got defeated because of that. Now there's a second attempt of including like a secondary census that would be just focusing on the race option. Yeah, but like there is attempts at using by like weird right wingers and like bad faith types of using like Roma people as a way to like blast other communities of like doing a personal Olympics, but it's not even going 90% of the time. It's not even inside the actual communities, right? It's inside weird
Mm.
white wingers using the like genuine horrific history of the of people in Portugal to like just attack black people or Asian people or like queer people as if those communities don't intersect, right? This is
Mm.
like very small, and it's mostly just the realm of like weird right wing grifters, and most of those grifters don't do that anymore because it's just very profitable again to just be openly against everyone without any kind of like respectability. But like, I respect the good Romani, not the bad Romani, because now they just can openly just say they hate all Romani people again, and like that they want to suck here.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned the sentences a couple of times. I wanted to ask one thing really quick about it. Is the census data that was being proposed in Portugal, so not the one in Italy, because
Yeah.
that one was specifically not going to be oh fuck, I can't say this word. The Portugal census, was that going to have like names attached?
So in Portugal, you technically have names, right? It's like it's all we have a specific. It's one of the few things we have that's good. We have a big data protection law, right?
Mm,
This actually came of an issue with like the original proposal for the census, right? Because I believe there's some things where like they wanted to have names originally just so they know who to count. But then it was proposed into much more like an anomalous thing, right? So they would count less per names and more like this family here who's like non-white, etc., is by numbers, right? I specifically the methodology, right? But like the name stuff was always going to be there, and like we moved on like data protection issues were like in things, but it was never like of course for like health hunting, right? It was primarily
mm,
just like the census was like the census thing to include in the census like a waste option was always an idea from like black Portuguese like white groups, right? It was only
mm, mm,
like
mm.
briefly accepted by the government when the government here was like a slightly left wing government that was trying to like they had no majority in parliament, so they were trying to like be more open to groups that they know like vote for them and like not basically like they couldn't go right wing enough, right? So they had to actually respect some demands.
Mm,
The moment they got the majority that lasted like a year, they like removed all this stuff. There was like no more talk about the census. There was no more talk about like Roma groups. There was a whole proposal of like having a second. I mentioned this like the anti-racism observatory in Portugal that doesn't work for 2 years, right? There was like a
mm.
proposal by the government to make like a secondary anti-woman discrimination one that did not
Mm.
go through because the government was fell apart and a right wing government was elected, and the current proposal of the right wing government towards any woman thing is we're not going to talk about discrimination, so we're going to lump our Romani people with vague ideas about criminals. Like it's not like the previous left wing governments in Portugal were that great to Romani people. There's a big issue in the Portuguese left, even the most actually left part of the Portuguese left with talking about Romani issues. But like the right wing government here is like fundamentally just like openly racist and like fundamentally not talking about Roma issues, right? The secondarily, like besides not talking about Roma issues, fundamentally just like being very discriminatory in the policies themselves, right?
Mm.
So yeah.
Now, I know because you've talked a lot about Portugal for obvious reasons. Um, are there like give me two shakes? Let me put this question together in my brain. I guess the first side of the question is compared to the rest of Europe, is Portugal particularly bad towards Romani people? Is it average for Europe? And then I guess the converse of that question, are there places in Europe that are a little bit better
Uh,
towards Romani people?
I would say we're both like it's one of those things. In part, we're like in terms of like it's two things. In some parts we are just above, like just with like near the same the west. In some other parts we are like like Warsaw, white.
Mm,
Because there's like certain things, even like there's like certain things like from a policy wise, there's like very few like investment compared to other countries in terms of like more money, like actually trying to get more money, people like some kind of social protections and stuff like that. Like done. So like I think it's when some parts are the same or some parts are like worse. In terms of like those places that are relative, fucking like it's all relative of course because it's all bad everywhere else. But like for the Mandy, like if I like it's basically like the main place that's like slightly better for more people would be Spain, to be honest, because there's like Spain has a specific now they approved like a couple years ago anti like specifically a whole like giant law of like I believe it's called like the Roma law, which is like basically just a bunch of measures for Roma people. Um, Roma people in Spain also come from a specific reason called Andalusia, and like in the government for that, even if it's now that regional government in that area, region where most Roma people in Spain come from. They've been trying to remove all the Roma support stuff they got for the years, but like a lot of Roma groups there have been fighting and getting a lot of victory. So like there's still a lot of issues in Spain. Like it's one of the better places, honestly, for more people
Okay.
in Europe, which is all relative because it's all bad currently for a lot of different reasons.
The readings that I'd gotten from you did kind of give me that impression that it's there may be better or worse places, but it's all relative to a pretty generally bad situation.
Yes, like there's also like there's certain cities and reasons where like you will just be better, right? Specifically, if you like
Mm.
it's reasons where like there's a bunch of like majority non-white, majority in like more communities, right? But it's like just the general national state is still mostly bad.
Now, on the organizing side, because you have mentioned about like efforts in Portugal for community organizing, both within the Roma community, but also like between the Roma community and the Black communities. And are I imagine that we're seeing similar efforts in other places in Europe as well. Uh, are there is the example in Portugal? Is it a strong example of organization, or is it something that is a trendsetter for other places in Europe, or
Uh,
are
I
organizing efforts fairly similar?
I think it's like it has to do specific. I think it's primarily just following the wind because like I mentioned before, ways works a bit different in Europe than like America, and not like in a weird like. But Europe doesn't have racism or stuff, right? So like due to the native European colonialism and racial identity, right? Just like it works a bit different, right? So
Mm.
like a big things like there's always like in Europe, at least in like Southern Europe. So like I would say like part of the southern parts of the what we consider like the Central Europe. So like Portugal, Spain, and parts of France and Italy. There's always been like this combination of like various marginalized communities. This also happens in America, of course. Like various marginalized groups associated with, like colonialism in some form, right? Uniting in terms of like in terms of like organizing, right? So
Mm-mm.
in France, to give an example, that's not the word Roma, but like a bunch of like there's like a bunch of associations and organizing groups that's between like North Africans, like Algerians, Moroccans, Tunisians, Africans, like the rest of Africa, so like countries like Niger, like Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, etc., etc., and then
Mm-mm.
at Vietnamese people, Laotian people, some Chinese groups, and then like ethnic minorities that been there in France for a long while, and immigrants, which includes some groups that like in America would be considered like white, and like even in Europe are considered white, but like have a thing
Mm.
of like being immigrants that are like detested in like places like France, right? So like some Italian groups, some Portuguese immigrant groups, right? So like there's this groups of like the thing that unifies them is like they are like discriminated by the French state and suffer colonialism and like a type of like cultural racism, right? And are like
Mm-mm.
come in the center field because a lot of these people work in like they work like jobs in like construction work, right? They work jobs in like various fields like that, right?
Mm.
So like they all have this unified thing of like they all like they all work in the same jobs. They all like get like live in the same places. They all like fight like they all basically try to get the culture assimilated by the state. This is a similar thing in Portugal. Like a lot. So Portugal has very few social housing, right? But the very few social housing we have in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people that were in that social housing, right, were people from like the ex-African colonies and Roma people and that sort of groups. And because of that, a lot of those groups connected, learned their oppression together, learned how like they suffer the same. Both are like victims, of course, of like the Portuguese fascist state. And like they decide to like unify, right? So like there's a lot of like groups. One of the biggest groups right now for the capital region of like Lisbon, the capital city of Portugal, would be there's a group called Just Life, Life, like a good life, right? And like they organize everyone from the Lisbon suburbs, and I have to explain the thing because suburbs in Europe are different than suburbs in America, right? I think I explained this earlier in one of the previous things. Suburbs in Europe are like where all the poor people live, because the capital city, because there are cities built around the capital cities that are very expensive. So working class communities form like this like spaces that are technically sort of the same thing as like suburbs in America, right? They're like you live there but don't work there. But due to the nature of like colonialism and other things, the suburbs in Europe and places like Portugal, like there's the Greater Lisbon area, which is the suburbs around Lisbon, and a lot of those people, in those suburbs, the majority people are like non-white. They're poor people from the ex-colonies, the Brazilians. They're people from the Indian Portuguese community. They're Chinese. They're Roma, and like. I was reading a statistic, like even the primary language there is not Portuguese. It's technically Portuguese. The primary language in that region is Portuguese Creole. So because of that, the suburbs in a lot of Europe form like this kind of social like area of like that's all where the poor people live, specifically near the capitals. So like there's like I know a lot of like if in Portugal, if you go to a big city, and say you're from like the Lisbon suburbs, right? You like then when you get like a bounce of like social exclusion, because those places are perceived as like being first those racism of being they're the places where they're majority non-white, right? It's like they're perceived as like being alien to Portugueseness, right? But that's so there's like the thing of like there's like a bunch of panic about crime and stuff in those places, so they can perceive you're from like to use like a term in specific, just a way to describe how this happens. You're like you're from the ghetto, you're like from those regions where people get shot every day. This gets used like recently, like this doesn't even tie to Roma people, it all like connects, right? There was like a couple months ago where like a black man from one of the suburbs a suburb, the suburb with the most non-white population in Portugal. That's like a city when one of my uncles lives in, right? He was like sought by the police after getting in a fight because the police thought he was doing a crime that he did not do, and when the guy sought him because he thought he had a gun, he did not have a gun, of course, like always. But there was like a whole thing like that guy was killed by the police. There was a whole protest along every suburb, like not just the city he was from, but like every suburb, because this happens in every suburb, because police violence is very big towards any suburb region, specifically people from the suburbs that are not white, so like Roma, Black, Asian, etc., etc., etc. So like those big protests, big like people like breaking cars and police cars and everything, and of course the government did two things. First, they sent a bunch of police to like stop the rebellion and actually like said that they were gonna invest more in policing those regions, which those regions are already hyper policed. You see a cop, you don't like in my city. I technically live in one of the social housing regions with a lot of woman people. There's a lot of myths about crime here, but I never see a cop. I only see a cop when they do immigration waivers, which is sadly becoming common, like immigration waivers in America. But like if you go to one of those suburbs in Lisbon, you will see cops every day, because the idea is like to control those populations, right? The other thing they do is like they also finance a bunch of like incredibly assimilationist groups. They had a conversation where they expelled basically any radical group from those areas to like put us a bunch of groups that like focus on like big areas of like we're gonna make all those Africans and the Roma people like have jobs and like have respectable jobs, that they want to
Mm.
climb, that type of like very arrogant racism, right? So like so like there was this thing like I was mentioning like this group like there's a lot of organizing around like getting all those like suburbs into actually like bodies for into like group competitive groups, so like Roma people, black people, Asian people all live and like fight against like the racism in the Portuguese state because they've been
Mm.
oppressed in those areas a lot. So like there's like a lot of things like that. There's like I mentioned the criminalized racism in Portugal campaign that's a joint group by black groups, woman groups, stuff like that. Like it's not perfect, but intersectionality is like a recent idea in Portugal compared to other places, even in Europe. Right, there's like a
Mm.
lot of like refusal to engage in communities. There's a lot of issues regarding certain communities, like not in general, but like people in those communities like thinking they don't need to unite, right? But like it's getting better. I think
Okay.
because I think because the state of things are becoming more horrific, so everyone realizes they kind of need to just like unite a bit.
Wish it was for uh, less existential reasons, but it
Yes.
is good to hear that at least that there is that broad-based organization going on.
Yeah. I will say
It
that's
is.
still like just a thing. I will say that thing is still mostly in like the capital regions and everything. Like if you go to my city, where that's happening, there's less resources, so it's still like burgeoning in other places in Portugal. But like it's happening even in like the most
Hmm.
rural places, which is good. Which is good. But yeah, continue.
Oh no, I was I completely lost the thought that I had, but the
Sorry.
secondary thought because no, you're super okay. I'm completely scatterbrained. Soup had asked a little bit and had thanked you for clarifying the suburb city split. And something I'd been thinking about when you were talking about that, and I wonder if it is partially in the car culture of the U.S. and also the drive towards like a house
Mhm.
as a middle class signifier,
Yeah.
because you see like with the rise of the suburbs in the US, and it's very much it's at the same time as the rise in car culture and the boom in construction post-war,
Yeah.
where you got all of the kind of middle class to wealthier folks getting the fuck out of the city, which drives down the land prices in the city. So we end up getting a lot of our marginalized groups that live in the city itself. And then
Mhm.
you get that band of the more well-to-do suburbs. So it's very much. I'm not sure if it's the same in Australia, because wondering the question from Soup, but I wonder if it's similar there.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things of like those places to this thing. I don't know what to say, but I know like the white flight is a thing, right? Here it was like
Mm-mm.
reverse white flight, right? Because what happens is like specifically this has to do with like Portuguese colonialism, right? Because Lisbon was filled with like the capital city of Portugal, Lisbon was filled with like slaves, right? Like
Mm.
slaves from the slave trade, and then they would like do menial jobs, of course, like actual slave work. And then when slavery was abolished, they got into still in those. Like Lisbon has a history with like a lot of black communities and stuff like that. There's like a famous like historical black district in Lisbon, right? But what happened is kind of the reverse, right? Because what happens like a bounce when after colonialism and after like all of the Portuguese colonies were like became independent, right? A bunch
Mm.
of like people were going into the city. A bunch of people going to the city, and like there's also the rising of a new middle class in Portugal, right? Because Portugal and Spain, this happens in Spain as well, Madrid, because Madrid is like Madrid and Portugal. No, Portugal and Spain were got to be pop countries, and like the capitals were like the only places of luxury. Then they become a new middle class, right? And what
Mm.
happens was basically there was like a new wave of new African immigration, even if like African people in Portugal, of course, were like always there, and like a lot of the newly built West people, because Lisbon used to have sacks and everything. By the 70s and 80s, there was already a process of like a process of like pre-identification, right? Poor like you remove the sacks, but you move the poor people. You technically make a process of like new poor people, but like you put it everything below because there was like a genuine response like racism and xenophobia with like the arrival of like new African and like black immigrants in Portugal, right? So like a lot of the new West middle class in Lisbon was like, oh, we don't want you, right? So they were like sent to the suburbs, right? Why the suburbs? Because those places were already undeveloped, right? Because they were like not
Mm-hmm.
the places the West people, besides a couple of cities in the suburbs, they were not the places the West people wanted to live in, right? They wanted to live in the capital. So like all the other people, because they couldn't find jobs and things, they could find jobs in the capital. They couldn't find housing in the capital. They all went to the suburbs, right? Because instead of being a white flight, there was a reverse thing of like the West people and like the white people not want them in the city, right? Even if there's a lot of black people, there's a lot of black people in Lisbon, to be clear, just like in the very like far parts of it, right? The parts of like part of the city, but like very still far from the center because
Mm.
like they don't want them to be like associated with the glorious of the city, right? Because it was associated with like dirtiness, poorness, right? So like all those were like sent to like the far parts of the city. They were sent to like the suburbs, right? Which is similar with France. It's similar to parts of Spain. It's similar to Italy, right? That's kind of like the suburb system in Europe. Where
Okay.
like people from the wealthy capital want to stay in the capital, but don't like those poor people, right? So they just send them to the suburbs. They send them to the very like far parts of like the capital city, right? Where like they're technically in the city, but like they can not be seen walking around the main parts of the city center.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so that's kind of like there's like a lot of complexity because there's also like things like with the suburbs in Portugal, there's like they were very undeveloped, so a lot of social housing were built there to create communities there. But then like there was social housing there. A lot of black people went there to get like housing that was like free and accessible. A lot of Roma people went there, and the moment they realized Roma people went there, right, they just stopped doing that process because they're like, oh, we're building for like the true like workers, right, that are associated with like white people, right, and not like
Mm.
those women like black people. But yeah, but in general, that's how like the process of like suburbification works in Europe, right? Because it's not about like white flight. It's not about escaping to escape the black people, right? It's about like sending like all the non-white people to the suburbs, right? Because they don't want to see them in like the main parts of the
Mm.
capital.
Okay. And Hidundo was also had mentioned, echoing what you had said about right now about how it was working in France, and Hidundo had mentioned Parisian suburbs are very similar in that regard. They're portrayed in a lot of French media as pseudo ghettos.
Yes, like here, like if you talk about like the Greater Lisbon area, you literally kind of like to not if you're like talking to somebody from the rest of the country, even the city of Lisbon itself, and you say you're from like the suburbs, right? You kind of
Mm.
need to look west and white to not get set for it. Even then,
Mm.
to be clear, west white people from the suburbs of Lisbon get set from being in those areas. My uncle is a west, like not west, but like he's middle class. He's white.
Mm.
He worked for years as a casino guy in the city of Lisbon. But he gets shit from other people, even people his age, even friends of his, just because he lives in the area in the suburb of Port, in the biggest suburb of Lisbon. That's also the place with the most like where it's the population. I believe it's literally one of the few cities in Portugal where the majority of the population is non-white.
Uh, I'm just
But
wrapping my brain. It's like I dig all the things that you're saying, and I'm following you completely. Like you're not missing a beat on that. Uh, but there's always like that the echo in my brain of like how we see suburbs in the U.S. and it's like, okay, not that kind of suburb though.
yeah, like
Very different. Yeah.
I believe Japan has a similar thing with like certain parts of like Greater Tokyo, but like I haven't studied that enough to safely say.
Well, I know that we've got like, I know that we've got bed towns and things like that, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's not.
Yeah, there's like the what was called the Tokyo Ghetto, right? That was like the most in like the 80s and 90s, even before you were alive in Japan.
Well, I know that there are. I don't know Tokyo as well because I'm
Yeah,
still
yeah.
kind of learning my way around it. But I do know in Osaka there there are like areas that are predominantly Korean or areas that are
Yeah, yeah.
predominantly immigrant, and they're not like they're not so much in the suburbs. Like there's one,
Yeah.
I think Sudahosh it was pretty close to where I was living, and it's pretty central. But like within that area, it's
Yeah,
got a
yeah.
very very heavy Korean
Yeah, yeah.
population.
hmm Yeah, yeah. It's like there's I believe Kyoto has the same thing. Where like it's I believe it's actually in the city, but there's a specific part of Kyoto where like it's like the Korean Chinese like area, right? Which is also a fun fact. It's the area where like the Japanese Empire used Korean slave labor to build stuff.
Mm,
Yeah. So like there's that. I'm not as familiar with that. I'm trying to learn much more. My Japanese history post like samurais and stuff, right? Like I do know there's like stuff like that, but that's much more like podcast has similar things, right? There's like immigrant quarters that are very much just like this is the area slaves used to be, right? This has what in common in Europe.
mm,
Like a lot of like if you're not a suburb, a lot of the other places from like the 19th century, 19th century, right? If you see in Europe like a bunch of places like black people, right? That are not suburbs,
mm.
right? Or like people that have been living there for generations, those are like normally where like the slaves live, right? Or like they build ships and stuff like that. It's like slave labor.
Okay. I'm gonna put a quick pause because we are at the 1 hour point.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to give you and me and
I'm
also
gonna,
anybody who needs a drink to have 5 minutes or so to just do a stretch, and also because I got to use the bathroom. Um,
I'll be back. Yeah.
shall we take our break now?
Yeah. Let me just like mute everything.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know if
Yeah, I muted everything. But yeah,
Okay.
good. But no, good night, Holly. I hope you have a nice sleep.
All right. I think we are. Are we back? I mean, we should be back.
We are back, I believe.
Excellent. We had just wrapped up with suburbs talk.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's one of those things, right? Where like this is the Roma talk, but also like fundamentally you cannot separate talking about mass like this is the same thing in America, right? Like, but fundamentally, you cannot like in Europe, like a lot of the immigrant social classes, you cannot separate. Not necessarily like every marginalized social class, even certain types of white people, right, cannot be separated from talks about other social class when it comes to this type of stuff because it's all connected. It's the same thing in America,
Mm-mm.
but like it has its own specific things in Europe because like different places have different things and how this reacts and connects and everything. Yeah, yeah, but like so like it all connects and like because like okay, a key point that I've said is among all this talk is like all this is connected. All the racist things about Roma people are said about black people in Portugal. They're said about Asians. They're said about like even like what like white Brazilian immigrants, right? Because it's all connected in
Mm.
the same systems of oppression. So like it's important to talk about these things that. So like now
Okay.
it's like now let's see. Does anyone have questions? I have other
Are there
things.
any? Are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, like I have
Uh,
things in my head. Let me wait if I can answer anything.
as Soup was just saying, the main thing I was thinking during that was fascism really is the same across the world,
Yeah, fascism is the same
and
basically. Like the reality is like fascism is interesting because like it absorbs things locally, right? But it absorbs. It's not other things, right? Like there's different types of like if you go to even Europe, the like left wing tendencies in Europe will look different than America for the party with us. Even liberalism is different. Wait a second.
that's okay. All right, I think Alice is sorting something on its end, as giving us a mo. But if you can hear me, I don't know. Wait, maybe you can't hear me. I might be muted. I should put that in the chat. Uh, okay, okay, and Soup can hear me. Okay, so hearing is accomplished. Uh, okay.
Okay, cool. But no,
Um,
now what I'm saying is like, even if you like look at other types of like different political ideologies and different things do look different by countries. Like different types of leftist ideologies look different by country. Different types of like even liberalism looks different. Like fascism as a thing works, and like the only thing it will really absorb is aesthetics, right?
mm,
So
mm,
like so like Japanese fascism looks different than like Portuguese fascism in aesthetics, right? Because the like Japanese fascists like draw from like Buddhist influences, right? But how those are used were not different than like how the Portuguese fascist regime used Catholicism, right? Like it's all
mm,
just the aesthetics of like, oh, we gotta protect certain identity identifiers because at the end of the day, fascism is all just about aesthetics, right?
mm,
Like fundamentally they're not actually that different when it comes to ethnic, when it comes to anything. Maybe they hate the different tattoo group that one fascism doesn't hate because they don't exist, right? At the same time it's all just like aesthetics of imagery, right? It's
mm.
all like the same fucking thing everywhere else. Like you look at the discourse from the fascist party here, and you look say no, and it just sounds like the same shit because it's the same shit. Because they're of course talking about how the woke man is still talking about gender ideology. They're talking about political correctness, etc., etc. They're using American terms that like no one in Portugal knew existed. They're like
And that's what, not specifically on fascism, but on far right wing ideology. One thing that I did notice about how these things are becoming flattened a little bit in international groups, like the gender critical folks here
yeah.
are using like the same terms and arguments that we're seeing in England.
Yes,
Like
like
just translated, but it's the same. Like down to the quotes.
yeah, like in Portugal, the stuff regarding transphobic is like slightly different because it takes more like a Spanish thing, and the Spanish thing like they're still pretending to be slightly like leftist in language, right? But it's still like same, right? Because like the
Mm.
reality of like this technically changes in aesthetics, right? So like the two of them, for example, this is a transphobic thing. But there's like a big thing like certain left wing parties in Portugal have an issue with transphobia because like the trans issues in Portugal like a very they always insist but like accepted in certain leftist circles and like recently, right? So, like certain historical groups are having a bit of a clown face about that, right? So like there's a couple
Mm.
of new groups that are like there was a feminist group from the second city of Portugal, Porto, that dissolved over transphobia a couple of years ago, and now they're back as like the Revolutionary Women's Front, which is like just a transphobic group. It's a transphobic front group that using revolutionary language to talk about to be transphobic, right? But that's
Mm.
primarily just like if you look at the language, it's still the same thing as fascist, basically. Just maybe with a different aesthetics, because they're still talking about like gender ideology. They're talking about how it's like all a psyop to like make like woman masculine and stuff like that. It's like the same theater, frankly. Yeah,
Mm.
because all this stuff gets flat and like fundamentally like and going into like fascist groups, like there's a big thing here like abortion is becoming an issue again in the campaign because Portugal has one of the most strict abortion laws in all of Western Europe, right? It was
Oh, I
only
didn't know that.
yeah, we abortion was banned till 2008 in Portugal, where it was approved by a referendum, and even the referendum victory was like 50% to 40%.
Mm.
But like we have like the like you have to like I believe you have to do an abortion in Portugal. You need to do it in like the first 6 months, when like most countries like do it like 9 months and stuff like that. Though, so like that's an issue, and like there's like a lot of like right wing groups. Like we're having things of like fascist groups are going. We don't have abortion clinics. Like Spain has abortion clinics, but it's all done in like the public service scale, right? But even that, you have like right wing Christian groups like going into abortion clinics, now abortion hospitals to do abortions, right? To like protest
Mm.
them with the same language of like it's killing children, etc., etc., etc. So it's like the same rhetoric, basically. Yeah, so all those groups are like why those groups are not like those groups come from like specific Portuguese issues with conservatism and everything. So like the local groups, they do have international family from like America and stuff like that. Which is to be said that like there's a lot of flattening. It's all the same way. Like at the end of the day, like like the fucking this is not even the main fascist party. This is our libertarian party. That's basically just the second fascist party now. But they went like briefly with the poster that was like, and and indoctrination of they had like a big poster in a couple of cities. It was like and indoctrination of children in schools. Because like one of the big panics here now is like there was like a paper that like a academic like a thing for teachers to use that is like a paper how to handle trans students that was like don't treat trans students like third whiter, and of course right wingers were
Mm.
like got very angry with it, and the current right wing government removed that paper from schools with the same thing of they're indoctrinating children, they're making kids gay, etc., etc., etc. Like all the same fucking shit. And then there's also like what
Making the
like
kids in the frogs gay.
yes, there was also like the thing of like there's actual just American groups here like not this is about the Roma thing with like just talking about this like one of the biggest new religious groups showing up in Portugal is the Mormon source. They're
Oh
buying
fuck.
they're anyway just buying like they're buying like farmland in parts of rural Portugal to make like
Mm.
American style mega source there, which is like Zenway really fucking absurd. But like yeah, there's like appendix like stuff like that and like other things, yeah. But yeah, it's like one of those things of like this also just fucking reminds me fucking the largest fascist party here was like fucking doing a thing of like they put a poster like in the capo I believe it was like we stand with Elon Musk against the censorship mafia. This was specific because the European Union I think is like putting a fine into Twitter with some amazing stuff. But yeah, it's like one of those things like it's all the same at the end of the day. Is there more questions? Like
I think we're I think we're good on questions.
Do you have yourself any questions?
Well, I don't
Or just
not specifically about uh what we've talked about so far, but I'm wondering, since we're on the kind of in the modern era for
yeah.
tonight, and I'm wondering, like, what does the near future look like?
That's a good question. Like, it's one of those things like specifically in Europe. Besides a couple places, it looks really bleak. But like, I feel like people are like trying to like. I've been talking to a couple people. I've been to some talks about this. Like, there's like some. There was a community meeting of like the neighborhood I live in, right? Where like all people like reunited. This was more talk about like general stuff, but like what we should ask the local government and stuff. There was a couple of things about national politics asked. It was just, well, because like this is not a political meeting. This is specifically just a neighborhood meeting, and like very political issues are talked about it. But like there's stuff about like I feel like a lot of people are embracing for the worst. There's a lot of like cynicism and nihilism, but I feel like there's also people that are trying to imagine a way about it beyond this, right? Like I
Mm.
like there's like a lot of the anti-racist groups. There's like a bounce like there's a thing like a bunch of like the groups that talk about like this conversation or like having putting like a world map to like what Portuguese anti-racism looks like, right? And creating like a future about that, right? Beyond like just government measures,
Mm.
but like like the needing to like protect communities out of the fence, like the idea of like creating like something, right? Specifically in isolated areas, and I believe there's like I think I believe it's one of those things where like I believe it's one of those things where like there's a lot of like pessimism, but there's also like a belief of like possibly because there's been a couple battles, right, that have been won, even a few, and there's a belief of like trying to put in the hope, but even if the worst comes, hopefully the worst leaves, right? But
Mm. Mm.
like programs of self-defense, programs of things, there's already this is like not related to Roma people. Kind of, there's a thing like the government, the Portuguese government is trying to deport immigrants, right? Like Trump, they're using a lot of like, oh, those immigrants are criminals and stuff like that, and like I believe like 23 million, like this is Portuguese millions. Like instead of like 5 zeros, it's 4 zeros, right? Or like 3 zeros, like. But like fundamentally, like they want to deport a bunch of immigrants using the thing about it's the failed criminals, right? Those
Mm.
immigrants are criminals. But and there's a lot of like groups that have been very like normally shy about saying this, but they're like, no, if this happens, we'll literally just ask people to like not to like if you need to fight the police, please just fight the police. You deserve to be to stay here. So I believe there's like a bit more like Portugal always is seen in Europe, even in Spain, even in the rest of Southern Europe as like a very apolitical like country where like people are very depressed. It's part of our national identity, but like I believe there's like a lot of combativeness showing up because people are just like this cannot be like this. This cannot
Mm.
continue because like continuing like this is bad. But also this specifically has to do with like I mentioned before, there's like election results coming soon, right? There's like the elections on like in this weekend. And this Saturday, I believe. Wait, what's in English? What's the first? What's the second day of the weekend? Like the last day of the weekend? Is it Saturday or Sunday?
Sunday.
Yeah, Sunday. This Sunday is like the elections, and like a lot of people are very anxious because there's possibility of like a right wing majority. But like there is like people trying to like fight. Like I've been part of some campaign stuff with the group I'm a part of. Like while I've noticed a lot of pessimism, I also noticed a lot of people hoping and like wanting to fight. And like a
Mm.
lot of people more competitive about it because I haven't seen like the last couple of years, right? So we'll see. Like I believe like the future is like very unpredictable. I'm not Nostradamus, but like I do believe there's like a bit of hope, and like if the worst comes, you can like maintain like contain the worst, hopefully. But we'll see.
I mean, I guess you kind of have to. I'm not the you, but the you in the general you kind of have to hold on to hope just for the motivation of it. Because if you give up on the possibility that things can be made better,
Yeah,
then nobody will. organize. Nobody will try to.
Yeah, this is already an issue in like Portugal because like the thing with the Portuguese dictatorship was they weaponized the idea that Portugal was like a depressed country, that we are the country of like dooming and glooming, right? That we just need to be sad and then we go to heaven and then everything's okay. Like this was like weaponized when the dictatorship and like during like the 2000s and 90s there was a lot of like political apathy, right? And
Mm.
like one thing I believe is like it's very messy. Like there is issues specific in organizing groups in Portugal like that are like a lot of organizing groups in Portugal for a lot of causes, queer causes, even marginalized causes are still like located in the capital cities because those are like the two biggest cities because like those are the ones that have the money and like the support for those groups, right? But
Mm.
like, so there's groups like clubism, like also like racism inside the group, ableism, etc., etc. Like things are looking better now than they used to look. Like I've been like doing this type of thing for like a couple of years now, right? Since I was like 18 or 16, right? And my own things and talking about disability and talking about like my issues like queer stuff, right? For like some local groups here, and like I think things are more optimistic now than they used to be a couple of years ago. At least on like the actual like more organizing groups are being made, more people learning about organizing, right? Like I even just at like the most apolitical level, like I was talking about having like a neighborhood like association meeting thing. Those haven't
Mm.
happened like in my neighborhood for years, like literally for years. This like this like this is like the first time in a couple of years where like this has happened. Uh,
Okay.
so like I do things are a bit optimistic, but like there's a lot of issues that need to be done specifically because like a lot of things need to be done in a lot of angles, from queer stuff to like marginalized people to women people to like issues regarding housing, which is also becoming one of the big things regarding organizing. A lot of organizing housing organization stuff is happening, right? This affects Roma people a
Mm.
lot. I was talking to you a couple of streams ago about the stuff regarding occupiers and anti-occupiers. Right,
Mm. Mm.
we
Mm.
saw like anarchist squads and then the little hired goon, like Nazi goons in the traditional sense of like hired by like banking companies to like beat up poor people so they can like get back the houses they bought from like poor people to like I don't know sell to some whiz guy that gets arrested for a million crimes. Like like there's a lot, but like it looked like from an analyzing lens at least it looks better than like it previously was.
Okay. Now we do have a question in the chat from the soups, and to quote says, "I suppose a good question to ask. Are there any specific ways for me as an outsider to help with Portuguese resistance, or just stick to signal boosting and mutual aid?"
Basically, it's a signal boosting in which way. There's groups that do international campaigns, right? Occasionally, so like, but that's basically just like I will like not today because I actually have to do a thing soon. Like next stream on Monday, right? I'll give Weasel a list of organizations and you can like put them on like SATA. Um,
Oh, I would love that too.
yeah, so like, but specifically like. There's a couple of organizations that are very important. It's very much like they accept money from like outside, like people outside Portugal. They said like PayPal and stuff. So like if you can use like anything service, probably not PayPal because like this is like it being against sex workers, of course, like other companies, right? And now other things.
Mm.
There's like groups regarding queer stuff. There's like anarchist communes. There's like the big one, like Roma groups that are very important. There's groups that like feed people, right? I need to I actually need to like look up some this relates to everything, right? But I actually gonna ask a friend of mine about this because I'm gonna ask there's a couple of different Palestine groups in Portugal, right? That like help specifically with Palestine organization here, specifically because Portugal like has a small but like still like somewhat decent sized like Palestinian population. So like I would like to look. I'll also like put some links to like here's some like Palestine groups you can support them as well. But like the big things currently are like queer support groups, of course. women, black liberation groups, percent supporting because housing is like one of the biggest things here. But like signal boosting, giving money is basically the most thing you can do. There's some other groups who like they demand like make a social media post about this and everything. That made you might like if some other group says like it's basically just signal booster and do mutilate, and then if a group asks for like international support, they like give out the list of details to what to for that international support beyond mutilate, and signal boosting. But mutilate and signal boosting are like the most important things you can do now. Specifically because we are like in a bit of social crisis right now. Regarding things like I mentioned, like the housing issues, right? A thing with housing is like I'll actually look up. I'll actually ask a friend of mine. Ask a friend of mine from like the capital city what which links to give because we've been having like a issue with housing, right? This also has led to a big social crisis regarding association. Like to organize, you often need a place to organize, right? The headquarters or something like that, right? You can put it in the go. Like a lot of to this, there's a lot of like historical organizing groups in Portugal with a lot of respect, right? In a lot of causes, including Roma groups, right? Due to the housing crisis in Portugal, they're just getting kicked out of the buildings by like the landlords there. So a lot of like groups for like resistance and everything is just like dissolving because they literally don't have the money anymore. They don't have the money to have to have like a headquarters. They don't have the money to maintain things, and they're just disappearing. But a lot of them are like a lot of them have like GoFundMe's and like written in English and everything, explaining what happened, and stuff like that. Which is very important. So no, actually one more thing. Also immigrant rights groups are important. I almost forgot. Immigrant rights groups are super important because the Portuguese government is trying to illegalize immigrants. They changed a bunch of the immigration law to make it much more hard to immigrate to Portugal, and are basically doing a thing inside of they're doing something called the green way to immigration, right? Which is similar to the UK, which is a thing the UK is doing now currently, which is they or what they were doing because the government is like now even more like knocking down immigration. Like it's basically paying like third companies, right? Like third party companies to handle all the immigration stuff at the consulates, right? Which is a system done in the UK and has resulted in literally facilitating like slave trade. Because private companies get money to handle handle immigrant issues at the consulates, but those private companies demand from the immigrants more money, of course. They're often illegal. They often have like ties to criminal groups, of course, and it's a whole fucking mess that has not resulted. And I was fucking reading an article. This program has been in place for like 7 months, for like 6 months at this point, right? There's only been 50 people. There's been like not even 50 people. There's been no people using this program for immigration because it's real bureaucratic. It's real bad, and even like the companies that because the idea is like the government pays a third party, and then the third party pays a private company in Portugal to like put the workers there, right? And it turns out this is like they're not actually doing this. It's the system already put in bad, and just gonna lead to like much more like actually illegal immigration from this from like people are just gonna like pay to have no rights and like work in Portugal without any having no rights. It's like a big issue. But yeah,
it sounds like the it sounds a bit like the internship program here.
Yeah,
where there's huge abuses in that system, and it's been ongoing for fucking ever.
Yeah, it's like a big it's better all the rhetoric here in immigration because all the rhetoric has been those illegal immigrants come here and then they do not work. Like this specifically has because we have the system of like kind of similar to America. Like you could come here legally and then you get legalized if you paid like if you actually worked in a certain type of months and paid money to the Portuguese state, right? But now that got removed in favor of like this thing that's like, oh no, that the government was branding is like, oh now we're making them legal, but no, you're not making them legal. You're just exploiting them because like these people won't have like any rights at all. They'll just like work in Portugal and have basically no rights, and it'll be inside the company will be inside of them basically. Even like their social lives is like a nightmare. But yeah.
Quick side question attached to the immigration the immigration rights talk, do do you have a a separate group supporting refugees, or is that bundled within the group that is supporting immigrants?
It's kind of like like some groups bundle, right? Some
Mm-mm.
groups bundle it, but there's specific some groups for refugees, right? Uh, there's specific some groups for refugees. There's like so there's a group
Oh
for
shit.
refugees. Like there's groups, some of them specialized, right? There's a group for Middle Eastern refugees, right? Like Syrians. There's a group for Palestinians, right? Then there's like groups specifically focused on like refugees and giving refugees like access to basically first getting them entering the system, right? Because the Portuguese refugee system is a nightmare, right?
Mm.
And there's like groups around that. So like some is bundled, but like this refugees group is um I also will look. I'll like do a thing when I put in the group. So like I'll put them like here's all the immigration groups, here's the refugees groups, here's like the
Yeah.
queer groups, etc. etc. All right. Speaking
I
of
guess I
refugees,
was.
go ahead.
Oh,
No, go
I
ahead.
was just
But
gonna say I was wondering, just because here there are groups that support immigrants, but we do have a secondary group that is focused specifically on refugee rights because the refugee system here is hellish.
yes,
It's super super bad,
I have
and I
heard.
was
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was that similar split.
Yes. This is
Uh,
split. This is split.
okay.
The technically is like the whole thing like so we also have Ukrainian refugee groups, right? When like a bunch of Ukrainian refugees were taken hold of, right? That's technically it's expanded into the Ukrainian immigrant group because Portugal has a big Ukrainian immigrant community, but like a lot of them from the separate Ukrainian refugee groups, right?
Mm,
I, I, I defend Ukrainian refugees. Of course, they still come here and everything, etc., etc. Those groups are a bit more problematic because some of them have ties to like actual Ukrainian Nazi groups. Like
mm,
one of
mm,
the
mm.
leader of like the largest refugee groups of Ukrainians is like a guy that is literally running for parliament under the fascist party. Uh, but that's like its whole own thing in most Ukrainian refugee groups, or also like normal and work like the other refugee groups. Most refugee groups in Portugal are fine. I will like put the link and everything. But also relating to immigrants and refugees, this this is not Roma stuff. Since I'm talking about other Portuguese stuff, I might as well like talk about ways this because this is like a big issue. So
Mm,
Portugal technically since 2008 has refugee detainment groups, right? One of those like places, those prisons where they put refugees, right? But
mm,
those have
mm.
been deactivated since forever, since they never were like actually activated. They exist, like no one actually goes there, thankfully. The Portuguese government is now making a thing of like with the new anti-immigration, with the new like hard right turn on immigration on like more people and everything, they're now opening up what's called security centers. What does this mean? Basically, every like refugee or immigrant that gets rejected by the Portuguese immigration and refugee system, that gets rejected from the country and doesn't leave, they'll be put in this security centers that are basically mini prisons, like ICE detention
Mm,
centers in America. Right? There's already stuff like the government is so the first center was being made, right? But the government there's like it was leaked in the press that the government wants to pass a new law that will basically like if you are in those refugee centers, it you don't Portuguese police and like officers in those centers handling the refugees and like the immigrants there, right? Don't need to follow certain laws they would need, even in Portuguese prisons, which is
mm.
a nightmare, as you can probably tell by the sound of it, because it's very similar to the system ICE has in America.
It sounds similar to what we have here in Japan as well. The stories that I hear out of the immigration detention centers, the refugee detention centers here are they're not to the degree that we see in the States with what ICE is doing, but they are handling a much smaller cohort of people. But yeah, the amount of power that the detention centers have over the detainees is pretty unbelievable, and they are the word is fuck.
Because
There's very little accountability and there's very little transparency.
yeah, that's basically the goal here. There's also like we technically Portugal doesn't have an immigration police. We used to have. Actually, our immigration police used to come from the Portuguese dictatorship, right? The first dictatorship. They got abolished by a left-wing government after there was a scandal where like immigration police man was soaked an Ukrainian man to death in an airport publicly, but like everyone watched it. So they got abolished into, and now it's just like the police have like these normal Portuguese police have like immigration powers, right? That are given to them, and that's like a general like there was a separation, there was an intended separation between like immigration, like normal immigration, like the immigration police, right? That were given, like the powers were given to like the Portuguese police. But the new idea is this was like defeated last parliament, but it could show up again. Like the Portuguese government wanted to make a new immigration police, and specifically wanted to make an immigration police that will like function like a white police. So basically, it was just incredibly fucking dangerous. But yeah. When it comes to like tying this back to the Roma talk, when I know we're just talking to Central Portuguese stuff and like it all ties into Roma people anyway, like there are some plans of like trying to weasel out like oh, because this already is happening with black people that were born in Portugal and have Portuguese citizenship. There's this idea of like, oh, we are gonna the idea is like this. We are gonna focus a lot in like anti-immigration stuff, right? And how immigrants are criminals, right? We're gonna get powers to the police. Then we pass a law removing people's citizenship if they have crimes, right? So by removing those people's citizenship, they technically become immigrants, right? Because they're not considered Portuguese citizens anymore. So we can just like expel them to like this is happening to black people in Portugal or some black people in Portugal. We can expel them to like Angola or Mozambique, right? The idea is similar with Romani people because here's the thing: a lot of Roma people don't have documents, like even IDs. This is because they're born like isolated areas and like there's like a mistrust around the hospitals and everything because hospitals in Portugal, even the public system, which is pretty good, has done some horrific things to Roma people in the past years. So like some of them and like they don't trust the register systems because the register system has also been bad to Roma people. So like a lot of Roma people in Portugal don't have documents, don't have even an ID. So the idea is also, we put all of the if we weasel out our way and like find some Roma people without documents, right, or remove the citizenship for the few Roma people documents, right, we can just start putting them into the immigration systems, even though they're not immigrants, right? Not that immigrants is of that, like putting also like literal Portuguese citizens into immigration centers, right? Which is also happening in America. To be clear, this is also a Trump thing. Strategy, and then you just deport those people to like I don't know India or like Eastern Europe or something like that. Because the idea is like start basically not the ethnic cleansing of Roma people, but just like starting to say, oh, they're not actually like Portuguese, they're just immigrants, right? Ignore that they have like the same Portuguese accent as like a normal Portuguese person, right? They're actually immigrants.
Now the idea is being proposed, but like, is it got traction?
It will result in like the election results. Like there's an election, it will be in like Sunday. That would be like in Parliament. They tried passing that, right? They got the immigration detention center part. They're doing the detention center, but that's because that's the government public work thing, right? They don't need the Parliament department. They don't need the Parliament to approve those centers, right? They tried to push for the immigration police with riot powers, but that got defeated in commission, like a parliamentary commission, right? We will see what's happening because currently, what the government is doing, they're doing this campaign of like. I mentioned this before, not to summarize, like, we almost done to stream, so not to summarize the whole thing, like, the Portuguese government fell into a corruption scandal where, like, there was a law making not basically protected natural areas into allowing people. There's a thing in Portugal where they can make protected natural areas into like city places for city, right? With like markets and everything. The government wanted to expand that and remove a lot of protections from places like not like previous, like you couldn't do that in like mountain areas. You cannot do that in like land that was really protected, right? Like they wanted to open up the law to so you could make like actual, so you could make like a city a thing that was part of a already existing city in like a nature park, which would be absurd. That law was funded by it was found out the government was the prime minister was receiving post like basic benefits to post that law to be approved by a company he partly owns. That's a casino company that has interest in turning basically turning farmland into casino, right? The idea is like you basically get a bunch of protected land to be turned into like lands for casinos. The government failed to that because there was a whole collapse scandal. There was a whole collapse scandal about that. The whole parliament voted against the government. The government failed. So the government is doing like this thing of like, oh, we actually were attacked by the leftists and everything, and everyone's attacking us. Right. So like they're putting this campaign, but they're also putting this campaign of like, oh, if we get elected again, and we get the majority, either a majority in the with versus the existing parties, or a majority of the current government parties, and the Libertarian Party the Libertarian Party here, we will form a stable government, and they're already opposing a lot of like hard right ideas, right? They're opposing like the privatization of Portuguese healthcare and stuff like that, right? So it all depends on like if they get the majority or not, because if they don't, if there's no a majority, even like a majority between them and the Libertarian Party here, because the fascist party here wants to get into power, and the current government just to maintain the current power doesn't want to give that fascist party power, not because of political reasons, just because they both share the same ideology in politics. They just like don't want to share power. Why? Because the fascist party here wants like, they have the demand of like, we want the defense ministry, we want the healthcare ministry, we want the education ministry, right? And like they want to basically have total control, and like the current party doesn't want to see the control. But like, so the fascist party will like vote down any government with the right wing party in government, right? So like it's all dependent if the main right wing coalition currently that was the government or the Libertarian Party don't have a majority, there will be new elections in like 6 months, basically. So that then we'll see what happens with those elections, right? But like there's already talk of like, if the government doesn't get the majority, and like if the semi-left-wing bloc doesn't get the majority, there'll be new elections, right? If there is a majority, bad stuff is going to happen, because they're already going super hard right-wing with some of the promises they promised to. Like they have talked about like more deportations of immigrants. They have talked about there's like probably messing with land laws. There's like like with our last left-wing government, there was a law passed in Parliament banning conversion theories, and that was made into law. But the current government is doing a whole thing about saying they're going to repeal the ban on conversion theories if they win a majority. Like just going all like right-wing. Like they have talked about how they want an American healthcare system, how they want to privatize but the few remaining public services in Portugal, right? They want to introduce like a charter school system like in America.
Fucking hell.
So like it's fundamentally they're going as right-wing as possible to promise, right?
Right.
So like if they win, it's gonna be real bad. There's a whole polemic right now over pensions, because they might actually lose the election. The pollers like. There's been this whole thing about poll racing that's like very American style, like this. So, or this poll says that I don't know. Like the polls say they maybe might win, but there's currently a thing where like the main right wing parties like maybe losing the election because they promised to privatize the pension system, and a lot of the voters are elderly, and that's actually resulting in a backlash against them. Like the current prime minister has gotten into several fights with 70-year-old grandpas because of the possible privatization of the pension system here. So like we will see, but like if they win, it's real fucking bad. Like it's real bad that I've talked with my parents about possibly moving out the hill. Because like the stuff they're promising is like genuinely like we basically just want to turn Portugal into like Um, like basically a banana republic from the 50s, right? What's like the primary economy is tourism, and with Americans and like people coming here, and everything gets privatized, and doesn't mean police beating up people protesting. That's like the business of the government for like what podcast should be. So much like their current slogan is like, to construct a new Portugal, which is not totally not fast sounding, but what when they mean when construct a new Portugal means they want to make us like a fucking like semi like dictatorship. Well, where people can enjoy the tourism and everyone's poor and like there's no fucking social rights.
Well, we're gonna have to hope those election results come back not fucky, because that's a lot.
Yeah, it's
That's
weird.
an awful lot.
It's weird bad, but yeah, like this, like I will see if like there's one more. Does anyone have one more question? If not, I can just close up. I can give a closing speech because we're like 8 minutes from closing.
Do we have any questions in the chat before we start to put ribbons on the streams? Many crickets, but no questions, it seems like. Soup says no questions.
Okay, cool. So no, I'll just say this. Like, I fundamentally like this is us turning tomorrow. I talk about general podcast. Like, fundamentally, it's like the state of Roma people overall in Europe is we are bad. In Romania, like the first tour of the presidential election there got elected by like a fascist guy that's like out there, like just like praising like guys that try to exterminate the Roma people in Romania in the 40s. So like it's real bad. It's real bad out there. In a lot of ways, there's way too much stuff I cannot just cover in 2 hours. But like I have hope that like fundamentally when you're part of a group, this has something with me being trans, right? And like out there, like when you're part of a group that has been like semi-eugenicist that try to when people try to eugenics to that for forever, like you just kind of have a hope that like things will turn out well because like one people have existed as a people since forever, even outside of America, even outside of Europe, and hopefully we exist because we there was a literal fucking Holocaust attempt, and like with Jewish people, we still survived it. So hopefully we can survive according to the fascism now, and get a new future where people are not living in sacks, where people are like I don't even talk about this, but there's a whole thing like a lot of women people don't live in houses or anything in Portugal, or like in a lot of parts of Europe, they live in sacks, and like that's on purpose made, so local governments can go, oh, those women people living in sacks, and then they can get removed and like they live in the streets, homeless. But like hopefully can live in the future without when we don't live in sacks we'll have good lives that are not assimilated and have genuine liberation because liberation for all is important, like liberation for trans people, for disabled people, for every type of people, for Palestinian people, for every type of people that's being oppressed. That's very important. And thank you.
And thank you from the bottom of my heart and toes. This has been a wonderful experience. This has been a very learning experience. It's been a lot, but a lot of positive, even if a lot of the news topics have not necessarily been positive, but I deeply, deeply appreciate you taking the time and the energy to come and educate us, because that's what you've done.
Yeah, I was a bit afraid this would go bad, but it went well, thankfully.
It went very well.
Yeah. You're gonna need to like download the bot of Twist, by the way, because I forgot to like
Oh yeah.
record. I forgot to put recording, so I don't actually have a
Oh
recording
no,
of
no,
myself.
that's not a problem at all, because I always download the VOD, so I can give you
Okay.
the playlist link if you want to share that around, if that's something that you would like to do. Of course, please, by all means. And the VOD should be up probably within the next half hour or so.
Yeah, we have like 5 more minutes, so like let's just wait until I just get to 2 hours.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just notes from chat. Supum says absolutely harrowing, but quite necessary. Thank you for the talk tonight. Chronos, because it's Chronos, says that was infinitely more cheerful than LBP's future. Which, hun, I love ya. and you're not wrong, but maybe read the room on that one.
Listen, LVP4 is coming out soon, totally.
LBP4 is definitely around the corner. You gotta have hope, like we've talked about tonight. You gotta
Yeah.
keep the hope.
You have hope that they'll get Sackboy. No, selecting in PlayStation All Stars 2.
Oh god, the PlayStation All Stars 2.
Yeah, with Horizon White Lady and Kratos again, and Nathan Drake again.
They'll bring back Mod Nation Racers, so they give us Little Big Planet karting too. That's definitely on the horizon.
And Ellie Last of Us, and yeah.
Ellie Last of Us. Fucking Ellie Last of Us.
Yeah, you got to have your Zionism rep.
Gotta have. I mean, yeah. Can't have the PlayStation All Stars without the Zionism rep. Wait. There was no Ellie wasn't in the OG, was she? Because that was previous to.
Wait, wasn't she the? Did I get? I mean, the good. It's like the Side Last of Us one. No. The OZ Last Stars, yeah. No, Sony PlayStation All Stars one did not have Last of Us goal, yeah.
Yeah, because I think that would have predated. Soup says PS All Stars 2 would just be 16 clones of Joel Last of Us.
Yes, you have Deacon Saint Zorn from Days Gone. Deacon Saint.
Oh God, no!
With his swagger head.
You know, if they had PlayStation All Stars 2, it wouldn't be Sack Thing. It would be fucking Astrobot.
Yeah.
So and the entire whatever's left of the subreddit would just burst into flames and tears.
Yeah, so too. Good. Yeah.
But more seriously, this has been a good experience, Alice. Not anytime soon, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on as heavy a topic as it was this go around. But if you would in the future like to do a co-stream, like just on any old topic, sometime, would be open to that. This was a very nice experience all around.
Yeah. No, I can I can just like co-stream someday if you want to. Like, do we know? Yes, yeah. I guess like because we have 1 minute from this before we end. What's happening next week, Weasel?
Next week will be Monday and Thursday will be Slitterhead, and Friday will be It's a Question Mark. Might be Risk of Rain 2 because I had a lot of fun playing with Chef last time. That was a hoot. But it's going to depend on how much of the set that I've finished making. Hopefully, I would really like to have that done this week so I get recording done. But we'll see how that works out. I'm looking at the 30th, and that's not what this Friday is. This upcoming Friday is the 23rd, so I am completely fucked for calendars. Calendars fucked. Hate it.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's anything else for Administrata. I think that pretty much sorts us out on that end of things.
Everything's wrapped, basically.
Who knows? And although, side note, potentially, because like I said, not thinking of a co-stream anytime in the near future, but just in the future. But that might be something that we could set up with a little bit more animation, because would be doing it with the new laptop. So
yes,
that's a possibility.
I'm also like looking at. I'm like looking at like doing some because I'm returning to streaming like soon. I will have like a new like thing, and I'm also like working stuff maybe to Avatar White. So like, I'll have like probably a new setup if I have to stream from my side or something. Yeah.
Sweet. But that does bring us to the 2-hour point. So if we we'll say our guys. I'll do mine first because I know that you've got the button on your end. So let me do my wrap up, and if you'd like to do yours after that,
Yeah.
I will. Shit, lost my train of thought. How do